The millionaire's wife accused the maid of theft, and the millionaire fired her. But what the maid said made him fall to his knees. My days always started before the sun had a chance to rise. The steady hum of the city waking up served as my alarm. While the streets of Chicago gradually filled with life, I was already on my way to the grand estate where I worked. My life had always been a careful balance between duty and survival, divided between taking care of my sick mother, Helen, and working long hours as a housekeeper for the wealthy Thompson family. The home of Jonathan and Meredith Thompson was nothing short of breathtaking. With its modern architecture, gleaming glass windows, and pristine landscaping, it stood like a monument of wealth in an already affluent neighborhood. To the world, it was an enviable masterpiece. To me, it was just a reminder of the stark contrast between my reality and theirs. Inside those lavish walls, my job was to scrub floors, polish furniture, and remain unseen. That was my role, to blend into the background, to exist without truly being acknowledged. Just another fixture in the grand Thompson estate. Meredith Thompson carried herself like royalty. She moved through the mansion with an air of effortless dominance, her high heels clicking sharply against the marble floors, her sharp gaze always assessing, always judging. She rarely spoke directly to me, but her presence loomed over every aspect of my work. Orders were delivered through the head of staff, and everyone knew better than to cross her. Jonathan Thompson, on the other hand, was different. He was reserved, distant, yet there was something in his demeanor that made me wonder. He was not cruel like Meredith, but he was not particularly warm either. Occasionally, he would acknowledge my presence with a brief nod. And every so often, our eyes would meet across the room as if he were trying to place me, as if something about me seemed familiar. He never said anything, but I always felt there was an unspoken recognition. Even with that faint curiosity from Jonathan, I made sure to keep my distance. I could not afford to attract attention. My focus was, and always had been, my mother. Helen had fallen gravely ill a few years back, and her medical bills consumed nearly every dollar I made. Every paycheck from the Thompson estate went straight into her care, doctors, medication, rent for our tiny apartment. There was no room for mistakes. Losing this job would mean losing everything. That morning, there was an unusual heaviness in the air inside the mansion. The other staff moved quietly, their heads lowered, avoiding unnecessary interaction. Something was off, but I could not put my finger on what. It was only when I overheard hushed whispers in the kitchen that I learned the cause. "Did you hear about the bracelet?" One of the maids murmured. "The diamond one?" Another replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, it is gone. Mrs. Thompson is furious." My stomach twisted. I had seen that bracelet before. Meredith flaunted it often, at charity galas, business events, even casual luncheons. A piece that extravagant could have paid for my mother's treatment for years. The loss of such an item was no small matter. And if Meredith was searching for someone to blame, it would not take long before fingers were pointed. By the time I made my way upstairs to continue my tasks, I could hear Meredith's voice slicing through the silence of the halls. The staff scattered, finding places to disappear before her wrath reached them. "How could this happen?" Her voice thundered. "This is completely unacceptable. I demand answers." My pulse quickened. I had heard that tone before. It was the kind of anger that did not settle until it had found a scapegoat. I turned to leave, but before I could slip away, Meredith stormed into the room I was cleaning. Her sharp gaze landed on me. "You," she snapped. "Where were you this morning?" I froze, the cleaning rag still in my hands. My mind raced. "I was downstairs," I said, my voice steady but my hands trembling. "I have not touched anything, Mrs. Thompson. I swear." She took a step closer, her cold eyes boring into mine. "We will see about that," she hissed before turning on her heel and striding away. The tension in the house grew thicker as the day went on. I could feel the weight of suspicion pressing down on me, could sense the way the staff stole nervous glances in my direction. It was as if the entire mansion was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable storm. And then it came. That afternoon, as I folded linens in the laundry room, the door swung open so forcefully that I jumped. Meredith stood in the doorway, her face twisted in fury. Right behind her was Jonathan, his expression troubled but silent. In the hallway, other staff members lingered, their eyes wide with concern. Meredith wasted no time. She pointed a rigid finger at me. "This woman," she spat, her voice dripping with venom, "has stolen from me." I barely had time to process her words before she continued. "The diamond bracelet Jonathan gave me for our anniversary is missing, and she jabbed her finger toward me again, is the thief." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. My mouth went dry. My heart pounded. I began, but Meredith cut me off. "Do not you dare lie to me." Her voice echoed through the room. "You are the only one who had access to my dressing room this morning. You have always been ungrateful for the opportunity to work here, and now you have shown your true nature." My mind reeled. I had not been anywhere near her dressing room. My morning had been spent downstairs, cleaning, minding my own business. But I could see it in her face, she had already decided. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice calmer but firm. "Meredith, maybe we should." "No," she snapped, turning toward him. "She needs to be fired. I will not have a thief in my home." I felt my entire world tilt. Fired. The word echoed in my head. Losing this job meant losing my mother's care, losing our home, losing everything I had worked so hard to keep together. Desperation clawed at my throat as I turned to Jonathan. "Mr. Thompson, please," I begged. "I did not do this. I would never steal from anyone. You have to believe me." He met my gaze, and for the briefest moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt? Sympathy? I could not tell. But just as quickly, it vanished. He looked away, rubbing his temple as if he could erase the entire situation with a simple gesture. I think he hesitated, his eyes darting between his wife and me. The air felt thick with tension. "I think it is best if we handle this quietly. Let us not turn this into a spectacle." But Meredith had no interest in subtlety. "Quietly?" She scoffed. "This is my home, and I will not be embarrassed by some lowly maid who thinks she can steal from me. She needs to be out. Today." My heart pounded in my chest. This could not be happening. She had to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to step in. But the other staff members kept their heads lowered, avoiding eye contact. They knew better than to challenge Meredith. "I swear to you, I did not do this," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "I have always done my best here. I would never." "Enough," Meredith shouted, her voice like a whip crack. "Pack your things and get out. I do not want to see your face in this house again." My hands trembled as I took a step back, my mind spinning. Fired. Just like that, my world was crumbling. I opened my mouth to protest one last time, but before I could speak, Jonathan gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Go," he said quietly, avoiding my gaze. "It is for the best." And that was it. The final blow. A cold numbness washed over me as the reality sank in. My job, my livelihood, the one thing that had kept my mother and me afloat, it was gone. Just like that, erased by a single accusation. I turned and walked out of the laundry room, my legs unsteady, my vision blurred with tears I refused to shed in front of them. As I climbed the stairs to gather my things, Meredith's voice followed me, quieter now, but still dripping with venom. "You are lucky I am not calling the police." I did not respond. What was the point? I knew I was innocent, but in Meredith's world, innocence did not matter. All that mattered was power, and Meredith held it all. In my small room, I packed my few belongings into a worn-out bag. As I zipped it up, my mind raced. How would I explain this to my mother? How could I reassure her when I could barely hold myself together? We had been struggling to survive as it was. What were we going to do now? But even as the weight of my situation pressed down on me, something stirred deep inside me. A memory. A half-forgotten story my mother had told me long ago. A secret that might change everything. I wiped my eyes and stood up. I was not done yet. I descended the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The mansion that had once been my place of work now felt foreign, hostile, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The other staff members watched me with fleeting glances of pity, but no one dared to speak up. Everyone knew better than to challenge Meredith Thompson, especially after such a public accusation. The weight of my bag pressed against my shoulder, but it was nothing compared to the weight in my chest. The thought of returning home to my sick mother, explaining why I had lost the job, filled me with dread. Helen's condition was worsening by the day, and without my steady income, we were on the brink of losing everything. Why had this happened? Why had Meredith been so quick to accuse me, with no evidence other than my presence in the house? And why had Jonathan, who had always seemed more reasonable, more measured, allowed it to happen? As I reached the front door, my hand froze on the doorknob. This was it. The end of everything I had worked to maintain. And yet, something inside me refused to accept it without a fight. The memory that had stirred earlier now burned in my mind, giving me just enough courage to turn back. With shaky steps, I walked down the long hallway toward Jonathan's study. I did not knock. I simply pushed the door open and stepped inside. Jonathan sat at his desk, his brow furrowed as he stared down at a document. When he looked up and saw me, his expression shifted from surprise to something else, something almost expectant. "I thought you had left," he said quietly. My throat was dry, but I forced the words out. "Mr. Thompson, I did not steal that bracelet. I swear on my life that I did not. But there is something else you need to know. Something I did not want to say before. But now I have no choice." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "Go on." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. This was not how I had intended to reveal it, but there was no turning back now. My mother, Helen, she always told me that before I was born, she had a relationship with a man. A man who left before he ever knew she was pregnant. She never wanted me to find him, said it was better this way. But she always told me his name. Jonathan's expression remained still, though something flickered in his eyes. And? I took a breath. His name was Jonathan. Jonathan Thompson. The room fell into a thick silence. Jonathan's face paled, his eyes locked on mine. For a long moment, he said nothing. The doubt, the disbelief, the sheer weight of my words hung between us like a storm cloud. My heart sank. Had I made a mistake? Maybe he would not remember. Maybe this was all just some terrible coincidence. But then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Helen." The way he said my mother's name, soft, full of emotion, told me everything I needed to know. He remembered. "I loved her," he murmured, almost to himself. It was so long ago. I did not know. I never knew. With shaking hands, I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter. The letter my mother had kept all these years, yellowed and fragile with time, but still legible. I placed it on his desk, watching as Jonathan slowly picked it up, his eyes scanning the faded ink. "I do not know why she never told you," I said softly. "But this is the proof." Jonathan read the letter in silence. His expression shifted from shock to something deeper, regret, maybe. I was not sure. When he finally set the letter down, he looked at me, his eyes filled with something I had not expected, sorrow. "I should have known," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But I was young and foolish. And when her family kept us apart, I thought it was over. I never knew she was pregnant." My heart clenched. This was not how I had wanted to tell him, but now that the truth was out, there was no taking it back. I stood there, waiting, not knowing how he would respond. He slowly stood, walking toward me with hesitation. "All this time, you are my daughter." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I felt my chest tighten, but I held back my tears. I had spent too many years learning how to suppress them. I did not know either. Not until recently, I admitted. My mother did not want to tell me. But after everything that has happened, I could not keep it a secret any longer. Jonathan seemed at a loss for words. And for the first time since I had entered this house, I felt like I had changed something. This was no longer just about a stolen bracelet. This was about the truth. And the truth had finally come to light. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to process this revelation. "This changes everything," he said softly, almost to himself. "I need to think, I need time." I nodded, understanding the weight of what I had just told him. "I did not come here expecting anything from you, Mr. Thompson. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. That is all." Before Jonathan could respond, a sharp knock at the door made us both turn. Meredith stormed in, her face flushed with anger. She had not expected to see me there, and when her eyes landed on me, they burned with fury. "What is she still doing here?" Meredith demanded. "I told you to get rid of her." Jonathan glanced at me, then back at Meredith. For the first time, there was no hesitation in his voice. "We need to talk," he said firmly. "About everything." The air in the room thickened as Meredith stood there, her eyes darting between us, trying to make sense of the tension. Jonathan, for the first time in what felt like years, looked at her with a determination she had not seen before. I remained quiet, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that what came next would change everything. "What are you talking about?" Meredith demanded, her voice sharp. "What could possibly be left to discuss?" "I want her out of this house, Jonathan." Jonathan took a deep breath, his gaze lingering on Meredith for a moment before turning back to me. "There is something you do not know," he said, his tone firm but measured. "Something I just learned myself." Meredith's expression faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. "What are you talking about?" I could see the uncertainty in Jonathan's eyes as he searched for the right words. It was not easy to admit what had just been revealed, but it had to be done. He walked around his desk, moving closer to Meredith, who stood with her arms crossed, waiting for an explanation. "Lily is not just one of the housekeepers here," Jonathan began, his voice steady despite the storm that was about to hit. She is my daughter." The silence that followed his words was deafening. Meredith's face contorted in disbelief, a mixture of shock and anger flickering in her eyes. She took a step back as if the very idea of what Jonathan had just said was physically pushing her away. "What?" Meredith's voice came out in a harsh whisper, her lips barely moving. "What did you just say?" Jonathan glanced at me, then back at Meredith. "It is true. Helen, Lily's mother, was someone I was involved with many years ago, before we met. We were separated before I ever knew she was pregnant. And now I have learned that Lily is my daughter." Meredith's shock quickly morphed into fury. She let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking her head as if trying to shake off the absurdity of what she had just heard. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "How can you possibly believe this?" "She is lying, Jonathan. She is trying to manipulate you." My heart sank. I had known this was coming, but it did not make it any easier to hear. Meredith's voice dripped with venom, her accusations hanging heavy in the air. "I am not lying," I said quietly, stepping forward. I pulled the letter out from my bag again, holding it out toward Meredith. "This is a letter my mother kept for years. It is from Jonathan. It proves everything." Meredith snatched the letter from my hand and glanced at it, her eyes scanning the faded ink. Her expression grew more unreadable by the second. When she finished, she tossed the letter onto the desk as if it were nothing more than a piece of trash. "This proves nothing," she said coldly. "This could be forged for all we know. You are just some desperate girl trying to get a piece of our life." I bit my lip, trying to keep my emotions in check. I had expected resistance, but Meredith's words still cut deep. I turned to Jonathan, hoping he would step in, and he did. "Enough, Meredith," Jonathan said firmly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "I know it is hard to believe, but I do not need more proof. I remember Helen, and I remember everything that happened between us. This is not some scheme. Lily is telling the truth." Meredith's eyes blazed with fury. "So you are just going to accept this? You are going to let her manipulate you into believing she is your daughter? Just like that?" Jonathan stood his ground, his expression resolute. "This is not up for debate. The truth is the truth, whether you like it or not." For a moment, Meredith said nothing. The air between them crackled with tension as the weight of Jonathan's words sank in. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, she turned on her heel and stormed toward the door, pausing just long enough to deliver one last bitter parting shot. "If you want to throw away everything we have built because of this fantasy, Then go ahead, Meredith hissed. But do not expect me to stand by and watch. With that, she disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps echoing through the mansion. The room fell into a heavy silence once again, and I felt the weight of everything that had just transpired pressing down on me. I did not know whether to feel relief or guilt, but either way, nothing would be the same after today. Jonathan let out a long, tired sigh and turned toward me. I am sorry, he said, his voice softer now. I know this has been a lot, but I want you to know that I am going to do what I can to make this right. I should have known sooner, and I should have been there for you. I swallowed hard, my emotions swirling. I had dreamed of meeting my father for so long, but never like this. I did not come here to make things harder for you, I said quietly. I just thought you deserved to know. Jonathan nodded, his expression full of regret. I appreciate that. And now that I do know, we cannot just leave things as they are. I want to help you. I want to be a part of your life, Lily, if you will let me. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the father I had always wondered about, the man who had been missing from my life, but who now seemed willing to make amends. Before I could respond, a soft knock came at the door, and one of the house staff entered cautiously. Mr. Thompson, the maid said, her voice hesitant. Mrs. Thompson has requested that her things be packed. She is leaving. Jonathan glanced at me, a heavy sigh escaping him. It seems things are changing faster than we thought. I was not sure what to say. The weight of the truth hung between us, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt uncertain. But one thing was clear. My life and Jonathan's would never be the same. The echo of Meredith's footsteps lingered in the halls long after she left, but the silence that followed was almost louder. Jonathan stood by the window of his study, staring out at the sprawling garden he had once taken so much pride in. Now it all felt hollow. The manicured hedges, the pristine lawns, none of it mattered anymore. His mind was consumed by the weight of everything I had just revealed. I sat quietly in the corner of the room, unsure of what to say or do. I had been prepared for Meredith's fury, but the tension between her and Jonathan was harder to navigate. I could not help but wonder if I had made a mistake by revealing the truth. But deep down, I knew it was the right thing to do. Still, the look on Jonathan's face, the mixture of shock, regret, and something else I could not quite place, made my heart ache. Jonathan turned from the window and walked slowly back to his desk, his steps heavy with the weight of the years that had passed without him knowing the truth. He sat down, running a hand through his graying hair, and let out a long sigh. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in, and I could see the deep sense of regret in his eyes. Helen, he said quietly, almost to himself. I loved her. I really did. I did not respond. I was not sure what to say. Hearing him speak my mother's name with such tenderness was strange. Helen had always been a quiet, reserved woman, rarely speaking of the past. When she had told me about Jonathan, it had been with a mix of sadness and finality, as if she had already accepted that part of her life was over. Jonathan looked up at me, his eyes searching my face for something, maybe a glimpse of Helen, maybe a sense of understanding. I never knew, he said softly. I did not know she was pregnant. If I had known. He trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging in the air between us. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. I had always imagined what it would be like to meet my father, but I had never expected it to be like this, so full of regret, so complicated. I understand, I finally said, my voice quiet but steady. I do not blame you. I thought you should know. Jonathan nodded slowly, but the guilt in his eyes remained. I wish I had known sooner, he said. I would have done things differently. I would have been there for you and your mother. I appreciated his words, but they did not change the reality of the situation. The years that had passed, the years without him, could never be erased. Still, there was something in his tone, in the way he looked at me now, that made me believe he was sincere. I did not come here to ask for anything, I said softly. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. That is all. Jonathan shook his head, leaning forward on his desk as if the weight of his thoughts was too much to bear. No, Lily, you deserve more than that. I should have been there for you. For Helen. His voice cracked slightly as he said her name, and he quickly cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. I shifted in my seat. I had spent years imagining what it would be like to confront my father, but now that it was happening, the reality was far more complicated than I had anticipated. I could see the regret in Jonathan's eyes, but I was not sure if it was enough to bridge the gap between us. Too much time had passed. Too much had been left unsaid. Jonathan seemed to sense my hesitation. He stood up and walked over to where I sat, lowering himself to my level so that our eyes met. "Lily," he said softly, "I cannot change the past, but I want to make things right. I want to help you. You and your mother. Please let me do that." I felt a lump in my throat as I considered his words. The offer was tempting, especially given my mother's health, but something inside me resisted. Could I trust him? Could I accept his help after all these years of silence? Before I could respond, Jonathan continued. "I owe it to you. I owe it to Helen. I cannot undo the mistakes I have made, but I can try to make up for them now. Please, let me help." I looked down at my hands, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on me. I had never expected this kind of offer, and part of me wanted to say yes, to accept the help I so desperately needed. But another part of me was wary. Trust was not something that came easily, especially after everything I had been through. "I do not know," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know if I can trust you, not after everything." Jonathan nodded, his expression somber. "I understand," he said quietly. "And I do not blame you for feeling that way. But I want to earn your trust, Lily. I want to be a part of your life, if you will let me." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. I had expected anger, defensiveness, maybe even denial, but not this openness, this vulnerability. It was clear that Jonathan was trying to make amends, but whether or not I could accept that was a question I was not ready to answer just yet. "I need time," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I need to think about it." Jonathan nodded again, standing up slowly. "Take all the time you need," he said gently. "I will be here whenever you are ready." I stood as well, clutching my bag tightly to my side. The conversation had been far more emotional than I had anticipated, and I was not sure how to process everything that had just happened. All I knew was that my life had changed in a way I could never have predicted. As I made my way toward the door, Jonathan's voice stopped me one last time. "Lily," he called softly, and I turned to face him. "I am sorry." The apology hung in the air, filled with years of regret and missed opportunities. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and then I left the room, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. The next morning, the atmosphere in the Thompson mansion was tense. I had returned home after my conversation with Jonathan, but sleep had eluded me. I spent the night tossing and turning, trying to process everything. My father, Jonathan Thompson, wanted to be a part of my life. The man I had unknowingly worked for all these years was now offering to help me and my sick mother. It was too much to take in at once. As the first light of dawn crept through my window, I made my way back to the mansion, my mind heavy with uncertainty. I was not sure what my next move would be, but I needed to speak with Jonathan again. There were too many loose ends, too many questions that needed answers. When I arrived, the house felt quieter than usual. The staff went about their duties with a nervous energy, as if they sensed that something was brewing beneath the surface. I made my way to the study, hoping to find Jonathan alone. But as I reached the door, I heard voices inside, voices that were growing louder by the second. "I will not be humiliated like this." Meredith's voice rang out, sharp and filled with venom. "Do you understand, Jonathan? This is my house, my life, and I will not let some girl, some maid, come in here and tear it apart." My heart raced as I pressed my ear against the door. I knew I should not be eavesdropping, but I could not stop myself. I needed to hear what was being said. "I am not asking for your permission," Jonathan's voice replied, calm but firm. "This is not about you, Meredith. It is about the truth. Lily is my daughter, and I will not turn my back on her." There was a brief, stunned silence before Meredith spoke again, her voice trembling with rage. "How can you say that? You do not even know her. She is probably lying, trying to take advantage of us. Can't you see that? Jonathan's tone hardened. She is not lying. I knew her mother, Meredith. I loved her mother. And if I had known about Lily all those years ago, things would have been different. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. He had loved my mother. It was something Helen had never spoken about in detail, always keeping the past buried deep. But hearing Jonathan admit it now made everything feel more real. Meredith let out a bitter laugh. Oh, please. Do not try to romanticize the past, Jonathan. That was a lifetime ago. And now you want to drag all of that back into our lives? What about us? What about everything we have built together? Jonathan's voice softened slightly, but there was still an edge to it. Meredith, I am not asking you to like this, but I cannot ignore it anymore. Lily is my daughter, and I have a responsibility to her. I could not take it anymore. I pushed open the door, stepping into the room. Both Jonathan and Meredith turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of surprise and tension. Meredith's eyes narrowed as she took in my presence, her lips curling into a sneer. What are you doing here? She snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. Have you not caused enough damage already? My hands trembled, but I stood my ground. I did not come here to cause trouble, I said quietly. I just came to talk to Jonathan. Meredith's eyes flashed with anger. You do not get to call him that. He is my husband. And this is my house. You do not belong here. Meredith, Jonathan interjected, his tone a warning. That is enough. But Meredith was not done. She stepped closer to me, her eyes blazing with fury. You think you can just waltz in here, claim you are his daughter, and everything will magically change? You are nobody. You are nothing. You were hired to clean this house, not tear apart our family. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted the truth. I did not even know who my father was until recently. Meredith let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. The truth? You do not care about the truth. You care about money. That is what this is really about, is it not? You see an opportunity to cash in, and you are taking it. I felt the sting of her words, but before I could respond, Jonathan stepped between us, his voice cold and steady. Stop it, Meredith. This is not about money. Lily is not here for any of that. She is here because she deserves to know the truth, just like I do. Meredith's face twisted in disgust. And what about me, Jonathan? Do I not deserve something here? I have been your wife for years. I have stood by your side, and now you are throwing it all away for her? Jonathan turned to face her, his expression full of regret, but firm in his resolve. I am not throwing anything away, but I cannot ignore what is right in front of me. Lily is my daughter, and that changes things. The room fell into a tense silence. Meredith's hands balled into fists at her sides, her face red with anger. She opened her mouth to say something, but then closed it, as if struggling to find the right words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice cold and calculated. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. And when this all blows up in your face, do not come crying to me. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the mansion, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its wake. I stood there, my heart still racing from the confrontation. I had not expected Meredith to lash out like that, but part of me was not surprised. She was desperate to hold on to her life, her status, and I was a threat to all of that. Jonathan let out a long breath, rubbing his temples as if trying to push away the headache that was surely forming. I am sorry about that, he said, his voice tired. Meredith is not handling this well. I shook my head. It is not your fault. I know this is a lot. I did not expect it to be easy. Jonathan looked at me, his eyes full of something I could not quite place. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was regret. Or maybe it was something more. I do not know what is going to happen next, he admitted. But I am going to make sure you and your mother are taken care of. That is a promise. I nodded, grateful but unsure of what the future held. The truth was out now, but the fallout was just beginning. The following days at the Thompson mansion felt like walking on eggshells. Meredith had retreated to her bedroom, barely speaking to anyone. She was like a storm waiting to erupt, and everyone in the household seemed to sense the tension. The staff moved around quietly, exchanging nervous glances, but keeping their distance from both Meredith and Jonathan. I, on the other hand, had kept mostly to myself. I did not know what to do next. My relationship with Jonathan was still so new. And though he had promised to help me and my mother, I was not sure how to navigate this complicated web of emotions. Part of me wanted to leave the mansion and never look back. But another part of me knew that running away would not solve anything. Then, one afternoon, as I was preparing to leave the mansion for the day, Jonathan called me into his study. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice serious. I nodded, stepping into the room. The last time we had spoken here, so many things had changed. Now, I was not sure what else there was to reveal. Jonathan motioned for me to sit down. "I have been doing some thinking," he began, "about everything that has happened. And there is something I need to get to the bottom of." My brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Jonathan leaned forward, his expression darkening. The necklace, Meredith's necklace that went missing. I cannot shake the feeling that there is more to this than we know. My heart sank. I had not thought much about the necklace since the day Meredith accused me of stealing it. In the whirlwind of revelations about my parentage, it had fallen to the back of my mind. But now, with Jonathan bringing it up again, the weight of that accusation returned in full force. "I swear, Mr. Thompson," I said quickly, my voice firm. "I had nothing to do with that necklace. I do not know where it is or why Meredith accused me." Jonathan held up a hand to stop me. "I believe you," he said, his tone reassuring. "I never thought you were involved in that. But Meredith's behavior lately, I have been thinking about it, and it does not make sense. She was so quick to blame you, so quick to make it public. And something about that does not sit right with me." I blinked, surprised. I had expected Jonathan to still be conflicted about the situation, but it seemed he had come to his own conclusions. "What are you saying?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I am saying that I do not think the necklace was stolen at all. I think Meredith hid it herself." My eyes widened in shock. "Why would she do that?" Jonathan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "To get rid of you. From the moment she realized you were a threat to her status in this house, she wanted you gone. She must have seen you as a danger, someone who could unravel everything she has worked so hard to keep together." A chill ran down my spine. "But why accuse me of stealing? Why not just fire me?" Jonathan's eyes darkened. "Because she knew that if she accused you of something as serious as theft, it would discredit you completely, not just here, but everywhere. You would never be able to find work in another household. She wanted to ruin you." My hands trembled in my lap. I had always known Meredith did not like me. But this level of cruelty was something I had not anticipated. Meredith had not just wanted me out of the house, she had wanted to destroy my entire future. But why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What did I ever do to her? Jonathan looked at me with a mixture of sadness and regret. "You did not do anything. But the moment Meredith realized you were my daughter, whether she consciously admitted it or not, she saw you as a threat to everything she had built here." I stared at the floor, my mind racing. It all made sense now. The cold looks, the snide comments, the swift accusation. Meredith had known, on some level, that I was connected to Jonathan in a way that threatened her carefully constructed world. And instead of confronting that truth, she had tried to destroy me before anyone else could discover it. "What are you going to do?" I asked, looking up at Jonathan. Jonathan rubbed his temples, clearly exhausted by the situation. "I am going to confront her. I cannot let this go on. She needs to tell the truth. And she needs to take responsibility for what she has done." I nodded, though the idea of confronting Meredith made my stomach churn. I was not sure what to expect from her anymore. Meredith had always been calculating, but if she had gone so far as to frame me for theft, there was no telling what she might do next. Later that evening, Jonathan called Meredith into the study. I stayed outside, lingering in the hallway, but close enough to hear the conversation. My heart raced as I listened to their voices, tense and sharp. "I want the truth, Meredith," Jonathan said, his voice stern. "I know you hid the necklace. I know you accused Lily of stealing it to get rid of her." There was a pause. And then Meredith's voice, cold and defensive. "You are being ridiculous. I did no such thing. You can stop lying," Jonathan snapped. "I am not going to let this go. You owe Lily an apology, and you owe me the truth." Another silence. I could imagine the look on Meredith's face, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes narrowing with disdain. But then, to my surprise, Meredith spoke again, her voice low and bitter. "So what if I did?" she hissed. "What difference does it make? You have already chosen her over me." Jonathan's voice softened, but it was clear he was not going to back down. "This is not about choosing sides. It is about doing what is right. You tried to destroy her life for your own selfish reasons. And that is something I cannot forgive." There was another pause. And then Meredith's voice, softer now but still filled with venom. "You have ruined everything, Jonathan. Everything." With that, the door to the study swung open, and Meredith stormed out, her face flushed with anger. She did not even glance at me as she passed, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floors. I watched her go, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over me. Jonathan stepped out of the study, his face tired but resolute. "It is over," he said quietly. She admitted it. I nodded, though my heart still felt heavy. The truth was out, but the damage had been done. And now we would have to pick up the pieces. Meredith's departure from the study left a void in the mansion. The sharp clack of her heels as she stormed down the hallway echoed long after she was gone. For the first time, I felt like the house was truly mine and Jonathan's, no longer overshadowed by the overbearing presence of Meredith. But with that came the reality that nothing would be the same. I stood in the hallway, watching Jonathan's face as he processed everything. He looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen him. His broad shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of all the years of deception and miscommunication had finally caught up to him. "She is leaving," Jonathan said after a long pause, his voice heavy. "She will pack her things and be gone by morning." I was not sure how to feel. The woman who had tormented me, framed me, and tried to ruin my life was finally being removed from the mansion. But it did not feel like a victory. Instead, it felt like a quiet, bitter end to a long, painful chapter in both of our lives. Jonathan turned to me, his eyes softening. "I am sorry," he said again, his voice filled with regret. "I should have seen this coming. I should have protected you from her." I shook my head, trying to ease his guilt. "It is not your fault," I said softly. "You could not have known." Jonathan let out a deep sigh and walked past me, moving toward the living room. "Even so," he murmured, "I have let too many things slide over the years. I should have done better, been better. For you, for your mother, for everyone." I followed Jonathan into the room, unsure of what to say. I had only just started to get to know him as my father. But seeing this side of him, vulnerable, reflective, made me realize just how much he was grappling with. Years of mistakes, regrets, and missed opportunities hung between us. And I could see the weight of it all pressing down on him. Jonathan sank into one of the large armchairs, rubbing his temples as if trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. The once perfect image of a wealthy, powerful businessman was now shattered, replaced by a man facing the consequences of his past choices. "I need to talk to her," Jonathan said suddenly, breaking the silence. I frowned, confused. "Talk to who?" "Helen," Jonathan replied, his voice steadier now. "Your mother. I owe her an apology, too, more than anyone." My heart skipped a beat at the mention of my mother. Helen had always been a quiet, private woman, never one to dwell on the past. But now, with Jonathan wanting to confront that past, I was not sure how she would react. She had kept the truth about him from me for so many years, and now everything was being unearthed. "I do not know if she will want to see you," I admitted. "She is complicated." Jonathan nodded, understanding. "I know, but I have to try. I cannot just leave things like this. I have already lost so much time." I was not sure what to say. Part of me wanted to protect my mother from the emotional turmoil that might come with seeing Jonathan again. But another part of me knew that this was something they both needed. If there was any hope of moving forward, they had to confront the past together. "I will talk to her," I finally said, my voice quiet. "I will let her know." Jonathan smiled, though it was a sad smile, weighed down by years of missed connections. "Thank you," he said softly. "I appreciate that." For the next few hours, the mansion was quieter than it had ever been. The staff moved around carefully, packing Meredith's things while avoiding eye contact with Jonathan or me. Everyone knew that a storm had just passed through the house, but no one wanted to acknowledge it openly. I sat by the window in one of the smaller sitting rooms, watching as the sun began to set over the city. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: relief, uncertainty, fear. I had come into this mansion just a housekeeper, and now my life had changed in ways I never could have imagined. Later that evening, as I was preparing to leave, I saw Meredith in the hallway. She was standing by the door, overseeing the last of her bags being loaded into a sleek black car. Her posture was stiff, her expression unreadable, but when her eyes met mine, something shifted. For a moment, the bitterness and anger that had defined her seemed to fade, replaced by something else, something softer. She did not say anything, but the look in her eyes was different. It was not an apology, but it was not the venomous hatred I had come to expect either. It was resignation, a quiet acceptance that her reign over the Thompson mansion had come to an end. Without a word, Meredith turned and walked out the door, the sound of the car engine starting breaking the silence. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Meredith was out of my life, but it did not feel like a victory. It felt like the end of something painful and unresolved. That night, I returned home to my small apartment, my thoughts heavy with everything that had transpired. My mother was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes tired but warm as always. "How was work?" Helen asked, her voice gentle. I hesitated, unsure of how to bring up everything that had happened. How could I explain the truth about Jonathan, about Meredith, about the necklace? It all seemed too overwhelming, too complicated. But as I sat down next to my mother, I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment to tell her everything. "Mom," I began softly, "there is something I need to tell you." Helen's brow furrowed in concern. "What is it, sweetheart?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "It is about Jonathan Thompson. He is my father." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and full of meaning. Helen's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she let out a long, shaky breath. "I knew this day would come," she whispered. I stared at her, confused. "You knew?" She nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. "I knew you would find out one day. I just did not know when." A surge of emotion washed over me, a mixture of relief and confusion. "Why did you not tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why did you keep this from me for so long?" Helen wiped away a tear, her hands trembling. "I was trying to protect you," she said softly. "I did not want you to grow up with the weight of knowing that your father had abandoned us. I thought it was better this way." My heart ached at my mother's words. I understood why she had kept the truth hidden, but it did not make the pain any less real. "I met him," I said quietly. "He wants to help us. He wants to see you." Helen's eyes widened again, and for a moment, I thought she might refuse. But then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "I will see him." The next day, the air was thick with tension as I prepared for what would likely be the most emotional moment of my life. After years of silence and secrets, my mother was finally going to meet Jonathan again. I was not sure how the reunion would go, but I knew it was something that needed to happen. The weight of the past had been hanging over all of us for too long. Helen was unusually quiet that morning. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Her face was pale, and her normally bright eyes seemed clouded with a mix of emotions. I did not push her to talk. I knew she needed time to process everything. By mid-afternoon, Jonathan had arranged for a car to pick us up and bring us to a quiet cafe in the city, a place far from the grandeur of his mansion, a place where they could talk without the weight of status or appearances. It was neutral ground, and that felt important for what was to come. As the car pulled up in front of our apartment, I glanced at my mother, who had been silent for most of the ride. "Are you ready?" I asked gently, not wanting to push, but knowing we could not turn back now. Helen took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she nodded. "I think so," she whispered, though I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. The cafe was small and cozy, tucked away on a quiet street lined with trees. When we arrived, Jonathan was already seated at a corner table, his face lined with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He stood up as soon as he saw us, his eyes locking onto my mother's. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Jonathan and Helen stared at each other, two people with a lifetime of history between them. Two people who had once shared something deep and meaningful, but had been torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. Helen took a hesitant step forward, her face unreadable. Jonathan mirrored her, his expression softening with every step. I watched from the side, my heart pounding as I held my breath. I had no idea what either of them would say, or if they would say anything at all. Finally, they were standing in front of each other. Jonathan's eyes were filled with regret, and my mother's with years of unspoken pain. "Helen," Jonathan said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Helen looked at him, her eyes flickering with a mixture of hurt and nostalgia. For a moment, I thought she might turn and leave, but then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she responded, "Jonathan." The single word seemed to carry the weight of years of longing, of heartache, of missed opportunities. They stood there, staring at each other as if trying to reconcile the past with the present, as if searching for the right words to bridge the gap that had grown between them. "I am sorry," Jonathan said, breaking the silence. "I am so sorry for everything. I never knew. I did not know about Lily. If I had known." Helen held up a hand, stopping him. "Do not," she said, her voice steady but filled with pain. "Do not say you would have done things differently. We both know that is not how it works." Jonathan's shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded, accepting her words. "You are right," he admitted. "I cannot change the past, but I want to make things right, Helen, for you, for Lily." My mother's eyes softened slightly as she looked over at me, standing a few feet away. "I kept the truth from her because I thought I was protecting her," she said quietly, her gaze returning to Jonathan. "But maybe I was wrong." Jonathan shook his head. "You did what you thought was best. I cannot fault you for that. But now we have a chance to do something different, to be there for her, together." My heart swelled at his words, though I still felt the tension between them. This was not going to be easy, and I knew that it would take time for the wounds of the past to heal. But for the first time in my life, I saw the possibility of a future where we could all move forward together. Helen hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking between Jonathan and me. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted softly. "It has been so long, and there is so much that has been left unsaid." Jonathan reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "We will figure it out," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "One step at a time for Lily." Helen looked down at their hands, her eyes welling with tears she had clearly been trying to hold back. For a moment, she seemed to be lost in thought, as if weighing the years of heartache against the possibility of a new beginning. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "One step at a time." Jonathan smiled, a small, tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. It was a sign that things, while not perfect, could be better, that they could start to heal the wounds that had been left open for too long. We all sat down at the table. The initial tension between Jonathan and Helen gave way to a quiet, reflective conversation. They talked about the past, about the decisions that had led them to this moment. Jonathan apologized repeatedly, though my mother insisted that we could not dwell on what was already done. I watched them both, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. The past could never be undone, but perhaps, just perhaps, we could find some peace in the present. As we finished our coffee, Jonathan turned to me, his expression serious. "I want to be a part of your life," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I know I have missed so much, but if you will let me, I want to help you and your mother." I looked at my mother, who gave me a small nod of encouragement. It was a lot to take in Jonathan's sudden presence in my life, the offer of help, the possibility of a relationship with the father I had never known. But as I sat there, surrounded by both of my parents for the first time in my life, something inside me began to shift. "I would like that," I said softly, my heart full of emotions I was only beginning to understand. "I would like that a lot." Jonathan smiled again, this time with more warmth, and my mother reached out to squeeze my hand. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope. It was not a perfect reunion, and there were still many challenges ahead, but it was a start, and that was enough. The days following the reunion at the cafe were a whirlwind of emotions for me. My relationship with Jonathan was still new, still fragile, but it was beginning to take shape in ways I had not expected. After years of working under his roof without truly knowing him, I now found myself trying to understand him as my father, a man who had missed so many years of my life, but who now wanted to be present. Jonathan, true to his word, made an effort to visit my mother and me regularly. It was awkward at first. The three of us were not used to spending time together, and the weight of the past still hung over every conversation. But with each visit, the tension began to ease. We found small things to talk about: my childhood, my mother's memories of their time together, Jonathan's experiences as a businessman. The conversations were light, but they were slowly building a foundation of trust. One evening, Jonathan arrived at our apartment with a sense of nervous anticipation. He had called ahead, asking if he could speak with both my mother and me together, and I could tell from the tone of his voice that this conversation was different from our usual visits. He was standing at the door, dressed more casually than usual, holding a box in his hands. I opened the door, letting him in. "Hey, Dad," I said, the words still feeling new and a little strange on my tongue, but it was getting easier to say. Jonathan smiled, the warmth in his expression evident. "Hey, sweetheart. I am glad you are both here." My mother was sitting on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, watching Jonathan closely. She was still getting used to having him around again, and though the bitterness of the past had softened, there were still moments when she looked at him with a quiet sadness, as if mourning the years they had lost. Jonathan walked over to the small dining table and placed the box down gently. "I have been thinking a lot about the future," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "About how I want to be a better father, a better man for both of you. And I know I cannot undo the past, but I want to make things right." My mother and I exchanged a glance, unsure of what Jonathan was leading up to. He took a deep breath and continued. "I want to help you both in any way I can, and I know that one of the biggest challenges has been the financial burden, especially with your mother's medical bills. So I have taken care of those." My eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" Jonathan opened the box, revealing a stack of papers. "These are all the outstanding bills for your mother's treatment. I have paid them in full." And now, with one gesture, Jonathan had lifted that burden off my shoulders. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. "You have no idea how much this means to us." Jonathan reached out and took my hand. "I am just sorry it took me so long to get here. But I am here now and I am not going anywhere." Helen, who had been silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "Jonathan, I never wanted you to feel obligated. I kept Lily from you because I did not want to complicate your life. But seeing you here, doing all of this for us, I realize now that I made a mistake. I should have told you from the beginning." Jonathan shook his head, his expression full of regret. "No, Helen, you did what you thought was right at the time. I cannot blame you for that. But now, we have a chance to make things better for all of us." There was a long pause, the three of us sitting in the quiet of the small apartment, the weight of years of unspoken truth hanging in the air. It was not easy to navigate this new relationship, but the desire to move forward was stronger than the pain of the past. I looked at my mother, then at Jonathan. "We have all made mistakes," I said softly. "But I think we are ready to start over, to be a family, in whatever way that works for us." Jonathan's eyes glistened with emotion as he nodded. "I would like that," he said quietly. "I would like that a lot." For the rest of the evening, we sat together, talking about the future. Jonathan shared his plans for how he wanted to be more involved in my life, how he wanted to help me pursue my dreams, whatever they might be. My mother, for the first time in years, seemed lighter, as if the burden of the past had finally been lifted from her shoulders. As the night wore on, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It was not perfect. There were still many unresolved emotions, and the future was uncertain. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a family, a real family. Before Jonathan left, he stood by the door, looking at both me and my mother with a mixture of gratitude and hope. "I am here whenever you need me," he said. "And I'm not going anywhere this time." I smiled, my heart full. "We know," I said softly. "We know." As the door closed behind him, my mother and I sat in the quiet of our apartment, both of us reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. It was not the life I had expected, but it was a life filled with possibility, with hope. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that things would get better. In the weeks that followed, the sense of change in my life became undeniable. What had once been a daily struggle to keep my head above water was now a tentative journey towards something new, something better. With Jonathan's support, the burden of my mother's medical bills was no longer a constant weight on my shoulders. The future, for the first time in years, felt less like an impossible climb and more like a path I could actually walk. Jonathan had kept true to his word. He visited frequently, spending time with both me and my mother. Though his relationship with her remained complicated, the years of separation could not be erased in a few short weeks. But they were slowly learning how to be in each other's lives again. There were still unspoken words between them, wounds that would take time to heal, but they were both trying. And that was enough for now. I, on the other hand, found myself adjusting to the idea of having a father, a real father, who cared about me. Jonathan had become a steady presence in my life, someone I could rely on, not just for financial help, but for emotional support as well. He had made it clear that he did not want to overstep, that he was willing to move at my pace, and I appreciated that. After so many years of not knowing him, I needed time to figure out how we fit into each other's lives. One sunny afternoon, Jonathan invited my mother and me to his mansion for a small gathering. It was a quiet event, just the three of us, meant to mark a new chapter in our relationship. The mansion, once a place where I had felt invisible and out of place, now seemed different. I no longer walked through the grand halls as a housekeeper, but as someone who belonged. As we sat in the bright, sunlit dining room, Jonathan raised a glass to toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "For all of us." My mother and I exchanged a glance before raising our glasses as well. "To new beginnings," we echoed, clinking our glasses together. The moment felt symbolic in a way I had not anticipated. It was simple, just a small toast among family, but it represented so much more. It represented the healing of old wounds, the rebuilding of trust, and the hope for a better future. After the toast, Jonathan turned to me with a soft smile. "I have been thinking a lot about your future," he said, his tone warm. "And I know you have been working so hard for so long to take care of your mother. But I want to know what you want, Lily. What do you want to do with your life?" The question caught me off guard. I had not really allowed myself to think about my own future in years. My life had always been about survival, about working, paying bills, making sure my mother was taken care of. But now, with the weight of those responsibilities easing, the question opened a door I had not even realized was there. "I do not know," I admitted, my voice soft. "I have never really thought about it. I guess I have always just been focused on getting by." Jonathan nodded, understanding. "Well, now that you do not have to worry as much, maybe it is time to think about what makes you happy. What do you love doing? What makes you feel alive?" I thought about the question for a moment, my mind drifting back to my childhood, before my mother had fallen ill. I remembered how much I had loved to paint, how I would lose myself for hours in creating art. But that passion had been buried under the weight of responsibility, forgotten as the years passed. "I used to love painting," I said quietly, almost as if I were speaking to myself. I have not done it in a long time, but it was something that always made me happy. Jonathan's face lit up with encouragement. Then maybe it is time to start again. You have the talent, Lily, and you have the time now. You could take some classes, really explore it. I felt a spark of excitement at the idea. It was something I had not allowed myself to consider before. But now it seemed possible. Maybe I could start painting again. Maybe I could even build a life around it. That sounds nice, I said, smiling. I think I would like that. Jonathan's smile widened. Then it is settled. We will make sure you have everything you need to start again. My mother, who had been quietly listening, reached over to squeeze my hand. You deserve this, she said softly. You have worked so hard for so long. It is time for you to do something for yourself. As we left the mansion that night, the world seemed brighter, full of possibility. It was not a perfect ending. There were still challenges ahead, still wounds that would take time to heal. But it was a new beginning. And for me, that was more than enough.